The office was nearly silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioning and the distant ticking of a wall clock. David Carter sat at his desk, fingers idly tapping against the sleek surface. It was past midnight, and the only light in the entire floor came from his screen and the dim hallway sconces. He wasn't supposed to be here this late, but unfinished reports and a stubborn work ethic kept him glued to his chair. And then the elevator dinged. David glanced up, expecting to see a janitor or maybe another overworked employee. Instead, Nathan Harris, his boss, CEO of one of the most powerful financial firms in the city, stepped into view. David straightened immediately, his pulse kicking up a notch. Nathan was imposing, even in the dim lighting. Tall, broad-shouldered, his dark gray suit tailored to perfection. His presence commanded attention in every room he entered, but tonight, something about him felt different. Less polished. More unsettled. Nathan's gaze swept the room before landing on David. Didn't expect anyone to still be here. His voice was deep, edged with something unreadable. David cleared his throat. Reports. I didn't want to leave them half-finished. Nathan walked further in, the scent of his cologne, a mix of cedarwood and something distinctly masculine, filling the space between them. You're dedicated. That's rare. He loosened his tie, sighing as he leaned against David's desk. His wedding ring caught the light for a second, a sharp, cold reminder. David forced his eyes away. I try. Nathan exhaled slowly. Must be exhausting, staying this late. You ever take time for yourself? David smirked. That's funny coming from you. You practically live here. A chuckle rumbled in Nathan's chest. Fair point. He ran a hand through his dark hair, making it fall slightly out of place, an unusual sight for a man always put together. Tonight's just one of those nights. David didn't ask what that meant. He could already guess. Everyone in the office knew Nathan's marriage was rocky at best. Whispers of arguments behind closed doors, of an unhappy wife who spent more time at charity events than at home. David had never cared to dwell on it, until now. Nathan studied him for a moment, his gaze lingering. You seeing anyone? The question was casual, but the way it was asked wasn't. David's breath hitched for just a second. He hesitated before answering, no. Nathan hummed, a sound low in his throat. Interesting. David's fingers curled against the edge of his desk. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the sudden weight of silence. Then, Nathan's hand brushed against his. Light. Fleeting. Intentional. David's stomach clenched. The touch was brief enough to be dismissed, but the heat it left behind was undeniable. His mind raced. Was he imagining this? Was he reading too much into it? Nathan pulled away, clearing his throat. I should go. David nodded, his face carefully neutral. Yeah. See you tomorrow, sir. Nathan's eyes lingered on him for a second too long before he turned and walked away. The office door clicked shut behind him. David exhaled sharply. His heart was hammering. He ran a hand over his face, trying to shake the feeling. This was ridiculous. His straight, married boss had no reason to look at him like that. No reason to touch him at all. He needed a distraction. Standing up, he grabbed his gym bag and made his way to the executive locker room, one of the many perks of working in the upper floors of the building. The space was empty, as expected at this hour. He peeled off his shirt, his muscles tight with stress, then stripped down completely before stepping into the large, high-pressure shower. Warm water cascaded over his body, washing away the tension, but not the thoughts. Nathan. The way he looked at him. The way he lingered. David closed his eyes, pressing his palms against the cool tile. This was dangerous. Stupid. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't real. It couldn't be. And then, the sound of the locker room door opening. David's eyes snapped open. Footsteps echoed against the tile floor. Slow. Deliberate. His stomach twisted as he turned his head toward the entrance of the shower stalls. A figure stood there, partially obscured by steam. Nathan. His shirt was unbuttoned at the top, sleeves rolled up. His expression unreadable. Nathan started, then stopped. His throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. David's pulse thundered. Neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The sound of water filled the space between them, thick with unspoken tension. Then, Nathan stepped forward. David's breath hitched, his body frozen in place as his boss closed the distance between them. And the world outside that shower ceased to exist. Steam curled around David as he stood beneath the pounding water, his skin slick with heat. His breath came shallow, heart hammering as Nathan Harris stood just outside the stall, unmoving. Neither of them spoke. Nathan's dress shirt was undone at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His usual crisp, commanding presence was fraying at the edges. His jaw was clenched, tension radiating from him in waves. David swallowed hard. "What are you doing here?" His voice was low, unsteady. Nathan exhaled through his nose, as if battling something within himself. "I don't know." The words hung heavy between them. A lie. Nathan knew exactly why he was here. David's fingers flexed against the tiled wall, his mind screaming at him to say something, to break whatever this was before it went too far. But then Nathan took a step forward, the sound of his shoes against the wet tile cutting through the rushing water. Another step. David's pulse skyrocketed. Nathan was close enough now that the steam curled around both of them, blurring the lines of where one ended and the other began. He wasn't touching him, but he could. David's chest tightened. "You should go." Nathan let out a short, humorless laugh. "I know." But he didn't move. His gaze flickered down for just a second, barely perceptible, before snapping back up to David's face. A war waged in his expression, desire and hesitation in equal measure. David should have stepped back. Should have done anything but stand there and let his married, straight boss look at him like that. But he didn't move either. Nathan's throat bobbed. He cut himself off, running a hand over his face, as if trying to shake whatever had taken hold of him. "This is wrong." David's jaw tightened. "Then leave." Nathan's hand fisted at his side, tension radiating off him in waves. And then, he moved. It was a decision made in an instant. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Nathan surged forward, pressing David back against the cool tile. His body was heat and desperation, one hand braced beside David's head, the other gripping his jaw. His breath was hot, uneven, ghosting over David's lips but not quite touching. "I don't know how to stop thinking about you," Nathan admitted, voice raw, strained. David's breath hitched. He should push him away. Remind him of his wife, his marriage, the unspoken rules of this world they lived in. But instead, he kissed him. A sharp intake of breath, Nathan's, then everything unraveled. Nathan crashed into him, mouth desperate, unforgiving. The weight of restraint shattered in an instant as hands roamed, as heat burned through every inch of David's skin. Nathan wasn't gentle. He kissed like a man who had denied himself for too long, fingers gripping David's waist, pressing him back against the wall like he was afraid he might vanish. David felt the wedding ring as Nathan's hand skimmed up his side. Cold metal against burning skin. Reality slammed into him. He tore away, chest heaving. Nathan's eyes were wild, pupils blown wide. His lips were red, his usually perfect composure in ruins. David's voice was hoarse. "Your wife." Nathan flinched, just barely, but didn't step back. His breath was uneven. "I know." David shook his head, forcing himself to see past the heat, past the way his entire body craved more. "This isn't a mistake you can take back," he said, voice steadier now. Nathan exhaled sharply, looking away for the first time. His fingers curled at his side, jaw tight. Then, he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. David stood frozen, heart pounding in the aftermath. His skin was still hot. His lips still tingled. But all he could feel now was the weight of everything they had just ruined. David hadn't seen Nathan all morning. Not in his office. Not in the break room. Not even in the usual executive meetings where his presence was inescapable. It was deliberate. David should have been relieved. Instead, his body still ached with the ghost of Nathan's touch, and his mind replayed last night's moment in the shower like a film stuck on repeat. Desperation. That split second of surrender. A mistake. That's what it had been. A catastrophic mistake. And yet, when his office phone buzzed at precisely 3:47 p.m. with a text from Nathan, his pulse spiked instead of settled. Nathan, my office. Now. David stared at the message, fingers tightening around his phone. This was stupid. He could ignore it. Should ignore it. But his feet were already moving. By the time he reached Nathan's office, his hands were clammy, his mouth dry. The blinds were drawn, a rare occurrence, and when he stepped inside, Nathan was standing by the window, his back turned. The door shut with a quiet click behind him. Nathan didn't look up right away. When he did, his face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something dangerous. Lock the door. David swallowed. Nathan. Lock it. A warning. A plea. A challenge. David hesitated for a breath too long. Then, his fingers twisted the lock. The sound was louder than it should have been, sealing them inside. Nathan exhaled sharply. Last night. It shouldn't have happened, David interrupted, his voice firmer than he felt. We were caught in the moment. It was late, emotions were high. You were. Nathan was in front of him in 3 long strides. I was what? David's back hit the door. Nathan caged him in, one hand braced above his head, the scent of him suffocatingly close. Tell me you didn't feel it, Nathan murmured. David clenched his jaw. Feel what? Nathan's fingers skimmed down his tie, slow, testing. This. David's stomach twisted. You're married. Nathan's jaw tensed. You think I don't know that? Then why are we even talking about this? Nathan's gaze burned into him. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Because every time I close my eyes I see your face. Because when I kissed you, it didn't feel like a mistake. David's breath hitched. This was dangerous. This was insane. Yet, he didn't move away. Nathan exhaled sharply, the tension thick, almost unbearable. His hand curled around David's tie, slowly pulling him closer. Tell me to stop. David's pulse thundered. He should. He should push him away, walk out, pretend this never happened. But when Nathan's lips brushed his, the decision was made for him. The kiss was slow this time. Purposeful. No hesitation, no frantic need to prove something, just raw, undeniable want. Nathan's hand slipped to David's waist, gripping hard, pressing him back against the door. Their breaths mingled, hot and uneven, as lips parted and deepened, as hands roamed. The wedding ring glinted in the low office light. Reality slammed into David like a freight train. He ripped himself away, chest heaving. Nathan looked just as wrecked, his tie loose, his hair slightly out of place, the image of a man who had just fallen too far. We can't do this, David rasped. Nathan's eyes darkened, but he didn't argue. For the first time, guilt flickered in his expression. David shook his head. Whatever this is, it's going to destroy you. Nathan's throat bobbed. I know. Silence stretched between them. And then, with a deep, unsteady breath, Nathan stepped back. The distance between them felt like an abyss. Go, Nathan said hoarsely. Before I forget every reason why I shouldn't want you. David didn't hesitate this time. He unlocked the door and walked out without looking back. The days that followed felt like an open wound. David kept his head down, avoided lingering in the hallways, and buried himself in work. He didn't check his phone for messages that weren't there. He didn't allow himself to think about the way Nathan had looked at him before he walked away. But it didn't matter. Because the tension was everywhere. It was in the way Nathan's gaze flickered to him across the conference room table. His expression carefully blank but his hands clenched into fists. It was in the way David's stomach tightened every time they brushed past each other in the hallway, the air charged, suffocating. It was in the silence, the one that spoke louder than anything ever had. And then, on Friday evening, just as David was about to leave, Nathan called him. "Nathan, come to my house. Now." David stared at the screen, pulse hammering. He should ignore it. He should turn his phone off and walk away, for good this time. Instead, he grabbed his keys. Nathan's house was exactly as David imagined it. Huge, modern, sterile. Place where love had left a long time ago. The moment Nathan opened the door, David knew. This was it. Nathan's tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked wrecked, exhaustion in the dark circles under his eyes, tension in the way he braced himself against the doorway. "Where is she?" David's voice was quiet, but steady. "Gone for the weekend." Nathan stepped aside. "Come in." David hesitated. Then, he walked inside. The house was dim, the air thick with unspoken things. Nathan closed the door. David turned to face him, hands in his pockets, trying to act unaffected. "Why am I here?" Nathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped forward, closer, closer, until David could feel his breath on his skin. "I tried to stay away," Nathan murmured. "I really did." David swallowed. "And—" Nathan's fingers brushed his wrist. "And I can't." That was all it took. David surged forward, grabbing Nathan by the collar and crashing their mouths together. The restraint, the hesitation, the guilt, it all shattered in an instant. Nathan groaned against him, hands gripping, pulling, taking. They stumbled through the house, lips never breaking, desperate, reckless. This wasn't a mistake anymore. This was a choice. And David had made his. Later, as they lay tangled in sheets that weren't hers, the weight of what they had done settled between them. Nathan's hand traced slow circles on David's back. His wedding ring sat abandoned on the nightstand. "This won't end well," David whispered. Nathan exhaled. "I know." Silence stretched. Then, softly, "I don't care." David closed his eyes. Neither did he.